On Christmas Eve, under the dazzling glow of holiday lights, a little girl stood shivering in the cold, clutching a battered teddy bear. Her tiny arms were covered in bruises, her eyes full of silent pleas no one seemed to hear. Just a few steps away, her drunken stepfather staggered into the night, leaving her abandoned, broken, and alone. But fate had other plans. A man watched from the shadows, a millionaire CEO, haunted by his own past, carrying the weight of loneliness money could never cure. In that fleeting moment when his eyes met hers, two shattered worlds collided. He could have walked away, but instead he chose to step forward. This story is not just about saving a child. It is about finding family where the world least expects it. Stay with us and subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories, because sometimes the most powerful love begins with a single act of courage. Under the glitter of Christmas lights, Nashville looked alive, but for Caleb Whitman it felt like a hollow stage. Families filled the sidewalks with laughter, shops spilled carols into the air, and windows glowed with warmth. Yet he walked through it all like a man out of place, his breath curling in the cold, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. He had money, power, and influence, but none of it quieted the ache that shadowed him through every holiday. The city could have been made of glass, and he would have still felt invisible. As he paused in front of a toy store, he was struck by the sight of a little red coat displayed in the window. It looked exactly like the one his daughter once wore on winter nights when she tugged him into stores, giggling as she picked out stuffed animals. The memory hit him without warning, tightening his throat, pressing against the walls of his chest until he turned away, unable to stand still under the weight of it. The city unfolded around him in scenes that belonged to someone else's story. Restaurants shimmered with golden light where couples shared dinners and whispered promises. Buskers strummed carols on the corners, their music carried on the sharp winter air. Caleb drifted through it all, a man caught between shadows and memory. He tried to focus on business, on numbers and mergers, on meetings that filled his calendar. But the loneliness clung to him, a silent reminder that all his success had left him with rooms too quiet, meals too solitary, and a life echoing with absence. It was then in a narrow alley tucked behind a diner that the night changed forever. At first he thought the sound was a stray cat or the wind cutting through the bricks, but then he heard it again, a cry fragile and broken. He stepped closer, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. Against a dumpster, curled in on herself, was a little girl no more than 7. Her sweater was thin, threadbare against the December air, her shoes mismatched and soaked through. She clutched a teddy bear so worn it seemed to be unraveling in her arms. Dirt streaked her cheeks, tears glistened in her eyes. The cry grew sharp when a man's voice shattered the night. Slurred with alcohol, filled with bitterness, the figure stumbled forward with a half-empty bottle in his hand. "Stupid brat," he snarled. "You ruin everything." His face was red, his eyes glassy, his steps heavy and cruel. Caleb did not think. His body moved before his mind caught up. He stepped between them, his voice carrying through the alley with a force that surprised even him. "That is enough." The man blinked, staggered, cursed, and after one last glare disappeared into the dark, leaving only the stink of liquor behind. The child did not move. She pressed herself tighter against the wall, trembling, clutching the bear like a shield. Caleb knelt down, keeping his distance, his voice softened. "Hey, are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her lips were pale, her body shivering so violently that he could see her teeth chatter. He slipped off his heavy coat and placed it gently around her shoulders, moving slowly, careful not to frighten her further. She whispered then, almost too faint to hear, "Please do not take me back." The words pierced through him like ice. They were not just words of fear. They were words of survival, of a child who had already endured too much. Caleb felt something break inside, a resolve settling in. He nodded. "I will not. You are safe with me." Guiding her into the warmth of the diner, he ordered hot cocoa with extra marshmallows. The girl cradled the mug in trembling hands, her eyes cast down, her voice so quiet it was almost swallowed by the clatter of plates. "My name is Rosie," she said, hugging the bear close. My mom is in heaven. He is not really my dad. Caleb's chest tightened as he watched her. Every flinch at the sound of the door, every hesitation before taking a sip, told him she had lived too long in fear. He had no plan, no idea what the next step should be. But as she sat across from him, small and fragile in his coat, he knew one truth with absolute certainty. He was not leaving her. Not tonight. Later, when they stepped into the golden quiet of his penthouse, Rosie froze as though she had entered another world. She stood just inside the threshold, the firelight painting her small frame in warmth, yet she hovered as though afraid to touch anything. Caleb moved with care, offering her soup, towels, a robe too large but soft and safe. She accepted little, but each time she glanced at him, a question lingered in her gaze: could she trust this man? Caleb wrestled with his own uncertainty. He thought about calling Child Protective Services, about handing her over to professionals who knew what to do. His thumb hovered over the phone, but when he heard the sound of water running in the bathroom and imagined her finding a moment of comfort, he canceled the call. The truth was, he did not want to give her up. That night, Rosie curled on the floor despite the bed waiting for her. "I do not deserve beds," she whispered. Caleb's heart clenched, but he did not force her. Instead, he tucked the blanket around her and stayed nearby on the couch, letting her know she was not alone. In the middle of the night, her cry jolted him awake. She thrashed in her sleep, tangled in the blanket, whispering desperate pleas. Caleb rushed to her side, his voice steady, promising safety. When she woke, gasping, she clung to his hand with a grip so tight it felt like an anchor. For the first time, she let him hold her, trembling until exhaustion pulled her back into sleep. As he sat there in the glow of the fire, the child pressed against him, he realized his life had shifted in a way no deal or fortune could rival. A promise had formed in the silence, unspoken yet unbreakable. He was no longer a man passing through the city alone, and she was no longer a child abandoned in the cold. Somehow, against the odds, they had found each other. The following days unfolded like a fragile truce between two broken lives. Caleb, once accustomed to silence echoing through the vast rooms of his penthouse, now found himself listening for the faint sound of small footsteps. Rosie moved cautiously, almost invisible in her presence, as if afraid she might be asked to leave at any moment. She touched nothing without permission, her little hands always clutching the battered bear that seemed to carry all of her history. He tried to make the space less intimidating for her. At breakfast, he placed plates of scrambled eggs and toast before her, keeping his voice light, speaking of the weather, of birds that sometimes perched on the window ledge. Rosie ate slowly, with the careful precision of someone unaccustomed to abundance. Each "thank you" she whispered was hesitant, as though kindness was something foreign, something she did not quite believe would last. One morning, he wrapped her in a scarf and knit cap he had found tucked away in his closet. "We need to visit a friend," he explained, trying to keep his tone casual. Rosie nodded, silent, her bear pressed against her chest. The drive through winter streets led them to the Cumberland Children's Clinic, a brick building painted with murals of smiling animals, its playground empty under the drizzle. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon cleaner. Families crowded the lobby, waiting for relief that always came too slowly. Rosie kept her eyes down as Caleb filled out the forms, writing his name as guardian. The word felt heavy, like a vow he had already made without speaking it aloud. When the nurse called them in, Rosie sat stiffly on the exam table, shoulders hunched, her feet dangling above the floor. The doctor, Lisa Grant, was gentle, her smile soft, her movements careful. Yet even the touch of the stethoscope made Rosie flinch, her breath catching. Caleb clenched his fists at his side, fury simmering silently as Lisa revealed the truth in a low voice. Old bruises, missing teeth, underweight, a history carved into her small body. Caleb wanted to shatter something, to rage at the injustice, but he knew his anger would not heal her. Instead, he focused on staying steady, on letting Rosie see that his calm was unshakable. Lisa assured him she would document everything, that Child Protective Services would be notified. It was then that Andrea Morales, A woman in a blue jacket with quiet authority in her posture stepped into the room. She spoke softly, explaining that Rosie had been flagged before, that her stepfather had slipped through cracks in the system. Caleb listened, jaw tight, as Andrea asked the question that would define everything. Was he willing to fight for custody, even if Dean contested it? There was no hesitation. "I am," Caleb said, the words clear, his resolve absolute. In the days that followed, the penthouse became both sanctuary and battleground. Caleb tried to offer Rosie pieces of childhood she had been denied. They baked gingerbread men on the marble kitchen island, flour dusting her nose until she laughed, shy but unguarded. He bought her colored pencils and paper, and she filled the pages with drawings of snowmen, trees, and two figures standing beneath a sky of stars. She never drew anyone else. Her laughter began to echo in the rooms, a sound the walls had never known before. But shadows lingered. At a bookstore, as Rosie clutched a worn copy of Charlotte's Web, her body suddenly froze. Across the parking lot stood Dean, his posture heavy with menace, a sneer curling his lips. Caleb moved instinctively, shielding her with his own body. Dean did not approach, but his presence alone sent a chill through them both. When they returned to the penthouse, security measures were tightened. They used private elevators, pseudonyms, and hired guards. Yet the fear in Rosie's eyes did not fade easily. One night, hotel security delivered a torn piece of paper left at the desk. On one side, Rosie's drawing had been ripped from her sketchpad. On the other, scrawled in jagged letters, were the words, "She's mine." Caleb's blood ran cold as he held it. He called Andrea immediately, his voice steady but sharp. "I want full custody, whatever it takes." Andrea warned him it would be an uphill battle, but Caleb's answer was simple. "I will not let him near her again." Rosie retreated into herself after that. She hid in closets, whispering to her bear about nightmares. Caleb found her one night, her small body shaking, her voice breaking as she confessed, "If I tell, he comes for me in my dreams." Caleb knelt, his voice gentle, promising again and again that she was safe, that Dean would never touch her while he was there. She studied his face, searching for doubt. When she finally nodded, something in her trust bound him more tightly than any contract ever could. Days blurred into weeks as preparations for the custody hearing consumed his energy. Lawyers came and went, papers were signed, evidence gathered. Yet amid the chaos, small rituals anchored them. Rosie decorated her room with blankets, bookshelves, and a giant nightlight shaped like a star. She taped her drawings to the walls, turning the sterile guest room into her kingdom. She asked to help with dinner, stirring soup or buttering bread, pride glowing in her face when he praised her efforts. At night, when fear crept back in, she would stand at his door, whispering the same question, "Will they make me go back?" Each time, Caleb pulled her close, repeating the only answer he could give. "No, I believe you. I am here." On the eve of the custody hearing, Rosie whispered to him as she colored quietly, her voice trembling. "What if the judge makes me go back? What if they do not believe me?" Caleb crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "Rosie, you are not bad. He is. You are good and you are brave. I believe you, and I will fight for you." Her face shifted then, a flicker of hope shining through years of fear. She reached for his hand and held it until she fell asleep. The morning of the hearing arrived with frost on the windows, the city muted by winter silence. Caleb, dressed in his best suit, the small snowflake sticker Rosie had given him still fixed to his lapel. It was more than a child's trinket. It was a symbol of trust, of a promise he would not break. As they walked into the courthouse, Rosie's hand clung to his, trembling but steady. He glanced down at her, at the locket of determination in her eyes, and knew that whatever awaited them inside, he was ready. For the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for. The courthouse was built of marble and echo, every footstep magnified into the high ceiling as if to remind those who entered of the weight of justice. Caleb walked beside Rosie, her small hand wrapped tightly around his own, her grip so fierce that his fingers ached. She wore the pale blue dress she had chosen for special days, her hair braided neatly, her battered bear tucked under her arm. Each detail felt like an armor too fragile for the battle they were walking into. Caleb adjusted his tie, his chest tight, the snowflake sticker still fixed to his lapel. It was no longer paper. It was his vow. The courtroom seemed enormous. Wooden benches gleamed under the solemn lights, flags hung in silence, and the judge sat at the high bench, her silver hair bound back, her eyes steady. Across the aisle, Dean Collins slouched in a cheap suit, his expression sharp with resentment. His gaze landed on Caleb and lingered, but Caleb refused to look away. He squeezed Rosie's hand gently, steadying her, anchoring himself. The hearing began. Millionaire, their lawyer, presented evidence with precision. Medical reports, photographs, witness statements, the drawing Rosie had once left behind. Each detail painted a portrait of neglect and cruelty. Andrea Morales from Child Protective Services spoke with unwavering calm, describing the long pattern of failures in the system, the repeated warnings, the dangers ignored. Her voice carried conviction, each word a stone placed carefully into the foundation of their case. Dean's lawyer rose in defense, dismissing the reports as exaggerations, framing Dean as a flawed but loving man. Dean himself took the stand, his voice flat at first, claiming he had made mistakes but loved his little girl. But when pressed, anger surfaced. He blamed Rosie, calling her difficult, calling her a liar. His words filled the room with a chill that no heater could warm. Millionaire responded not with fury but with quiet strength. She placed Rosie's torn bear on the evidence table. Her words cut through the air with clarity. Even this bear, worn and broken, has been treated with more tenderness by Mr. Whitman than Rosie was ever given by her stepfather. The silence that followed was sharp, the truth undeniable. Rosie was called next. Caleb's chest clenched, every instinct screaming to shield her, but Rosie nodded when asked, and with a bravery that seemed impossibly large for her small frame, she walked to the witness chair. The judge lowered the microphone to her level and spoke gently. "You do not have to say anything you do not want to, Rosie." Rosie glanced at Caleb. He mouthed only 2 words, "You are brave." She drew a breath, her voice thin but steady. "My real dad listens. He never yells. He makes pancakes with faces. He is not scared of the dark. He does not let anyone hurt me. I want to stay with him." The words hung in the air, fragile and unshakable at the same time. Then Millionaire presented one last piece of evidence, a drawing Rosie had made after Dean's threat at the hotel. It showed a tall man and a little girl holding hands beneath a Christmas tree, the torn bear at their feet. Above it, in uneven crayon letters, she had written, "My family." The judge studied the picture for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she removed her glasses and folded her hands. Her verdict was clear. Full guardianship granted to Caleb Whitman. Dean's parental rights were stripped, effective immediately. Rosie would remain with Caleb not as a guest, not as a temporary ward, but as family. Dean erupted, shouting, fighting against the officers who restrained him, his curses dissolving into the echo of the chamber. Caleb did not look at him. He turned to Rosie, gathered her in his arms, and felt her small arms lock around him with all the strength she had. Outside, snow was falling, gentle and endless, blanketing the courthouse steps in white. Rosie twirled in it, laughter bubbling free, her joy unbound. For Caleb, it felt as though the world itself had been remade, washed clean in the snowfall. They returned to the penthouse, and for the first time it did not feel like a gilded prison. It felt like a home. Rosie hung her pink coat beside his in the entryway, her small shoes lined up next to his polished ones. She decorated her room with paper ornaments, a snow globe, a nightlight shaped like a star. The laughter of a child filled the halls where once there had been only silence. Caleb watched her with quiet awe, marveling at the way trust bloomed slowly, how she would slip her hand into his during the simplest moments, as if testing and learning that he would always be there. On Christmas morning, the tree sparkled with lights. Rosie woke early, her slippers padding across the floor as she peeked at the presents waiting beneath the branches. Caleb surprised her with a small silver locket. Inside, one side held a photo of her mother, smiling in the summer sun. On the other, a new photo, Rosie and Caleb together at the Christmas market, their faces bright with laughter. He fastened it around her neck, his voice quiet. "So you will always have both of us close to your heart." She pressed it to her chest, tears brimming, and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Later that day, the penthouse filled with people who had walked this journey with them. Maya brought pastries, Andrea carried books, Lisa gifted a knitted scarf, and Melanie arrived with a small wind-up toy that made Rosie laugh. The rooms rang with voices, no longer hollow but layered with warmth and gratitude. Rosie dashed from guest to guest, showing her drawings, her locket, her joy impossible to contain. Every so often she reached for Caleb's hand, her touch a gentle reminder that all of it was real. That evening, as snow fell softly beyond the windows, Rosie hung a new ornament on the tree. It was a circle of paper with 3 figures drawn in crayon, a little girl, a tall man, and a bear with one ear. Above them she had written one word: home. Caleb tucked her into bed beneath a quilt patterned with stars. She clutched her bear and touched the locket at her throat, whispering, "Good night, Daddy." He paused at the doorway, his heart full in a way he had never thought possible, and whispered back, "Good night, Starshin." The fire crackled low, the penthouse glowing not with wealth, but with something far rarer. Family found in the most unexpected place. Love born out of courage and choice. And outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in a new beginning neither of them would ever forget. There are moments in life when the world shifts forever, not with the roar of thunder but with a whisper, a cry, a trembling hand reaching out in the dark. For Caleb, it was the sight of a little girl abandoned on Christmas Eve, her eyes pleading for safety no one else had given. For Rosie, it was the steady voice of a stranger who chose not to walk away. 2 broken hearts collided that night, and from their collision, something extraordinary was born. Rosie had lived her short years believing she did not deserve warmth, or safety, or even a bed to call her own. Caleb had lived his long years drowning in the silence of wealth, haunted by the ghosts of laughter he thought he would never hear again. They were both drifting, both lost, until the world forced their paths together. What followed was not easy. There were tears in the night, scars too deep to name, and battles that stretched into courtrooms and sleepless hours. But in the middle of all that pain, trust began to grow. Trust in the warmth of a coat draped over cold shoulders. Trust in the simple act of reading a bedtime story until nightmares gave way to peace. Trust in a man who swore he would not let her be hurt again. And from that trust, love blossomed. Not the kind of love written in contracts or bound by blood, but the love that chooses again and again to stay. Caleb became more than a protector. He became the father Rosie had always longed for. She became the daughter he never expected to find, the light in the darkness he thought was permanent. Together, they created a family not built by chance, but by courage, sacrifice, and the stubborn belief that broken things can be made whole again. This story is more than a tale of rescue. It is a reminder to all of us that family is not always the one we are born into. Sometimes family is found in the quiet miracle of kindness, in the choice to fight for someone who cannot fight alone, in the promise whispered in the stillness of night. You are safe. You are loved. You are home. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love often comes when we least expect it, then we invite you to be part of our family here at Hidden Echo Stories. Subscribe, stay with us, and let us continue to bring you tales that heal, inspire, and remind you of the power of hope. Because somewhere out there, in the shadows of loneliness and fear, another story is waiting to be told, another heart waiting to be found. And together, we will keep listening for those echoes until they are no longer hidden.